Welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast, where we want you to thrive in the ministry God has called you to. We truly believe that God's placement has purpose, and we're here for you with encouragement and tools for the journey.
Hey everybody, welcome to the Overflow Worship Podcast. I'm your host, Andrea Olson. Thank you for joining us again today. I'm really excited because I'm going to share the second part of a two-part conversation that we began last time with Jesse and Alta Keller. And I hope that you were encouraged by just the journey that they shared so openly and so beautifully about being faithful in each season and with each assignment. And my hope and prayer as we continue this conversation is that you walk away encouraged, whatever your context, whatever you're facing right now, whatever life looks like for you, whether in ministry or, just life in general, that you're encouraged by their story of being faithful with what's been set in front of them, but also really digging down deep and pursuing growth in each season. So here is the rest of our conversation. What bit of encouragement, for our listeners, we get lots of, worship leaders, church staff, team members that are listening to this podcast. And, I think there's a thought or a common theme when I talk to worship leaders of like, is this it? Like, not as in, am I going to make it to a bigger church, but like, is what I'm doing right here, is this like where I'm supposed to be, or is the struggle? Church can be hard, ministry can be hard. And so they might be in a really hard spot of feeling like, okay, is this it? Am I just going to be in church hurt and church hard for the rest of my life? And I, of course, believe that no, they don't have to live there and dwell there. But what bit of encouragement or what have you guys learned, not necessarily on church staff, but even just what God's doing in your lives right now with being faithful with what he set before you? What bit of encouragement could you give to our listeners?
I think kind of what you just said, that I think it's kind of two parts, that it seems kind of like a cliche church statement sometimes because you hear it often, but if you're not faithful in the small things, how will you expect to be faithful in larger things or bigger things that God puts before you? But even though we've heard that said 100 different ways, I truly believe that is at the root of it, that because whether we like it or not, or whether we see it or not, perhaps is the better way of saying it, God has given us something. If it's a part-time job that he gave us that we really don't like going to, but we needed something at that time, we need to be faithful in that. And if that turns into a full-time job that you need, or if that turns into a different opportunity that you've been waiting for, whether it takes 2 years, 5 years, or 40 years, God has given us something small, and I think every journey begins that way. Kind of a little side tangent just to speak to that. Like, often in the music world, we hear things like, man, where did they come from? Or they just blew up. Or, man, why did they get that opportunity when I've been busting it for 10 years? And the reality is, there's of course outliers in the story of that. It did actually blow up out of nowhere, but that's usually not the case. Like, most people have worked hard for years, and they've played tiny shows to 3 people, or they've written worship songs for a kids camp that 30 kids heard, or whatever, and there's generally always something small at the beginning of those journeys. And so I think realizing that and being okay with that, and realizing that, okay, this is the beginning of what I need to be, like how I need to be growing my heart and preparing my mind. I think that is the first piece. But then the second piece, just like you said, is developing an intimate enough relationship with the Lord that when he is ready to move you into the next thing, there isn't an ounce of fear standing in your way to actually do it. Because I think even if you had the first piece of that puzzle and you were working in your job or whatever the small thing is that you're doing or that seems small at that time, when the time comes for the Lord to move you out of that, it's not going to make a difference that he's ready to open up that bigger door if part of your heart is saying, oh man, but I need this part-time job to pay my bills. Okay, well then you're going to stay in that part-time job for the rest of your life because you're fearful of what the next step is. So I think they need to be going hand in hand. And I also think they allow us to be better at each of those along the process, because if you're just focusing on quote unquote forcing yourself to be content when you really don't want to feel content, you want to feel disappointed. If that's all your life is, then of course, you're going to get run down and you're not going to want to do that. But then also on the other hand is if you're just focusing on sitting with the Lord and building that intimate relationship, which to us has looked like reading and praying every day and surrounding ourselves with a community of people who in our everyday conversations speak about the Lord and their journey and that kind of thing. If that's all you're doing, but without any challenging growth on the other end, then we just are becoming, a generation here, which for a lot of people is this way, that's idolizing leaders or churches or whatever, which also is the other spectrum, the other unhealthy spectrum.
Yeah.
So I think we need both of those to go hand in hand. The challenges of the journey and the waiting with the developing relationship with the Lord. And that's what's going to continue to move us along the journey, whether it's slow or fast or whatever it looks like. But we're not going to be kicked to the curb every step of the way if we're doing those two things, I think.
Yeah.
I think too, there's a part where, yes, you should always be, I think, dreaming really big, and not just dreaming in your own mind and with your own circumstances, but inviting God to put dreams in your heart and in your mind so that you are in line with his initiative and his, his path for you. I have been reading this book by Eugene Peterson, who did the Message translation of the Bible. And one thing that he was talking about, the word prosperity in the Psalms, one of the meanings has nothing to do with success or how much money you make or security. It literally means leisure, and just the leisurely laid back life of believing that God is on your side and he is straightening the path before you, that he's for you, he's not against you. And that is actually what prosperity means. And I think it was Psalm 125, don't quote me on that, 124, 125, where he's talking about prosperity. And I loved that feeling of just a leisurely laid back approach to life, knowing that God is working on your behalf, and that you don't have to strive. And he says that if you trust him, he'll give you the desires of your heart, which I don't think means he's just going to make all of your wishes come true. I think it means he's going to put his desires in you, and that's going to be what guides you. And I've been just loving the Message translation lately because I've been reading this book. But in Matthew 6:33, it says, steep your life in God reality, God initiative, God provisions. Don't worry about missing out. You'll find all your everyday human concerns will be met. Give your entire attention to what God is doing right now, and don't get worked up about what may or may not happen tomorrow. And I just love that. Don't worry about missing out.
Yeah.
I have a severe case of FOMO sometimes. I'm very much fear of missing out on just what other people are doing, what I could be doing, all these things. When God is just saying, just live in this moment that I have you, in this spot that I have you, in this task I have you in this lane, and whether that's leading worship at your church of 10 people, or whether that's being on a stage in front of thousands, or it's rocking your baby to sleep, or it's making dinner for your family, or all of these things be in that moment, because that is actually designed by God. And what we see as success and what we see as a bigger platform or bigger, more successful job, it doesn't line up with God's kingdom. What lines up is that we are rooted and planted and just paying attention to what's in front of us, the influence you have with the people who are closest to you. And then that gives God space to create and to move circumstances and relationships around you that are going to be really just really fulfilling and really life-giving to you. So that's such a challenge for me. Just be paying attention to what's right in front of you and don't worry about missing out. God is working on my behalf. I have to remind myself of that literally all the time.
Amen.
But it's so good and so true.
So good. Thank you for sharing that and for sharing your hearts. For all of you who are listening out there, I hope that you're encouraged today, that God is working on your behalf in your situation, in whatever He's set in front of you. And from Jesse and Elta and myself as well, we just encourage you to be faithful with what He set in front of you. And like Elta and Jesse were just saying, be encouraged that he didn't forget. He's still writing your story. He didn't forget about you. He didn't forget that, you have dreams or desires. But I think the takeaway for all of us today is just to surrender those dreams and desires. Be faithful with what He's put in front of you and know that He's not done with you. He's writing this beautiful story. And one day you're going to look back and just be in awe at what He did. And all you had to do was just say yes to what was in front of you and to what he set before you. So Jesse and Elta, thank you so much for joining the Overflow Worship Podcast today. I really appreciate your time and encouragement for our people today.
Our pleasure. Thank you.
Thanks for having us.
Yeah.
Hey, if you'd like to hear more from our special guests today, Jesse and Alta Keller, you can find them under their band name, The Prams, on Spotify. Thanks for listening. Have a great rest of your day.